Journey of the Sparrows, Chapter 15. As I entered Matamoros, I knew I was back in the land of the poor. Turquoise, tan, and pink adobe buildings and weathered shacks were crowded together against the blue sky. Thin, barefooted children sold newspapers and candy. Adults tried to sell food from pushcarts. Men polished shoes, and an old Indian woman and two skinny children stood begging. I passed an empty lot where chickens ran loose, and a child without shoes held onto a rope tied around a pig. Children laughed. Babies cried. Music came from shops, and a gaunt-faced woman sat with her back against a wall, nursing an infant. I bought a roll from a cart, drank a bottle of orange refresco, and got on a bus going to Monterey. As I traveled closer to where we had lived with Mama and Teresa, my fear for Teresa became stronger, and the loss of Mama seemed more real. The crowded bus broiled in the heat, and even with the windows open, we smelled gasoline. Suddenly, the bus jerked to a stop. Cars were lined up along the highway. An accident, someone said. I stuck my head far out a window. 2 donkey carts were pulled off the road. A little girl was herding cattle with a switch, and a roadside shrine where someone had died was to our left. Finally, a group of people in front of us moved, and I saw a truck that had jackknifed. A boy on the bus, about my age, wiped his arm across his forehead. "Goddamn heat," he said. I thought of Tomas and remembered how he hugged and kissed me before I left. I touched my locket. Closing my eyes, I felt the sweat run down my face. At last, the bus began to move again. Later that day, we reached the outskirts of Monterey. I got off the bus and found a city bus going toward the part of Monterey which I believed Beatrice lived. We traveled through crowded streets, much traffic, and people hurrying in all directions. Finally, I thought I recognized a bull ring and a brewery. I got off the bus and stood still, bewildered. I remembered the cement block housing with its little lean-tos on my right, but the shacks of adobe, weathered wood, cardboard, and tin to my left did not seem familiar. Yet we'd stayed in such housing, and it was in such housing that I'd find Teresa. I longed to have Julia there with me. I'd never imagined I'd be coming back here alone someday. I walked down a road of rocks. Houses, shacks, and little businesses came up to the curb, and cows, chickens, and donkeys lived in the spaces behind the buildings. Children worked and played everywhere. A parrot hanging outside in a cage called to me, reminding me of Guatemala, and a wagon of watermelons pulled by a horse went by. Then I recognized the tall pink walls and barbed wire of a textile factory, and I knew we'd lived nearby. Our shack had been of tin, resting against an adobe hut that had remnants of blue paint crumbling from its walls. Beatrice Escada lived in that hut, along with her 5 young children, and her husband had left to find work several years ago and hadn't returned. But Beatrice could read and write a little, and since Mama had watched her children when she worked in the textile factory, it was Beatrice who wrote us about Mama being deported, and Beatrice who was supposed to have Teresa. I walked up and down the narrow roads trying to find where we'd lived, and occasionally checking to be sure the factory was still in my view. I began to ask people if they knew Beatrice, but they shook their heads. The sun went low in the sky, and its rays turned the smog and smoke violet above the homes. Roosters crowed, and dogs barked. Everywhere I looked, I saw thin, hungry children, dizzy and tired. I bought another refresco and sat on the stones by the side of a street, my head in my hands. Then a little girl spoke to me. I looked up, but the haze from the sunset surrounded her head so I couldn't see her face. "Are you Maria?" she asked again. I moved so I could see her more clearly. "Mama said we were to watch for you, but she's gone. Mama is." "Virginia," I said. "Virginia, is that you?" Virginia nodded again, but said, "Mama's gone. It's just us. Mama didn't come back." Virginia was Beatrice's second daughter. I felt tears in my eyes. "Virginia, where is your mother? Do you have Teresa, my little sister?" Virginia led me by the hand. We climbed over part of a fence, ducked under some clothes on a line, and finally stepped into the yard of a little blue hut with a tin shack at its side. There, next to an old tire, Eyes wide and blinking as she stared up at the darkening sky, stood a tiny girl. "Oscar," I whispered then. "Teresa." The small child tipped her head up to me. One side of her hair still held the remnant of a ribbon. When I picked her up, she didn't cry. I stepped inside the little home. 4 other children lay in the dim light. One was softly crying. I saw a dark drawing of the Virgin. "Gracias, gracias," I said, and closed my eyes. I felt Teresa's warmth against me, but she barely moved. "What's happened? Where's your mother? Don't you have any food?" I asked the oldest girl. A light appeared at the door, and I turned around. A young, heavily pregnant woman stood holding a carton of milk and a kerosene lamp. "Oh, thank goodness," she said. "Someone's come." "What happened?" I asked the woman. "Where's Beatrice? Why is no one with them?" The woman stepped inside, placed the lamp and milk on a trunk, and pressed her hands at the small of her back. "Beatrice was hurt at the factory. She'll be in the infirmary another 5 days or so. I've been doing what I could for them, bringing them some food, but I've got others," she sighed. "You must be here for Teresa." I nodded. "That's good," she said. "Maybe up north she'll have a chance. Maybe someday I'll go myself." She glanced around at the children. "At least they'll have some milk tonight." I set Teresa down. She lay listlessly on the floor. I felt her forehead, but it wasn't hot. "They're just hungry, I think," the woman said. "Do you have any food?" "No, but I've got some money." "That's good, good. I'll give them milk. You can go around the corner and buy them some tortillas and melons. Tomorrow you can cook beans. At least they'll sleep tonight." So I bought food and returned to the children. We all slept together, and I held Teresa in my arms, waking up 3 times that night to look at her and make sure I wasn't dreaming. The next morning I gave her a vitamin. My little sister's nose ran, her arms were thin, and her legs were slightly bowed, but she was alive. I wrote Julia a quick letter, letting her know that I'd found Teresa. Then I went to the infirmary where I located Beatrice. She lay there pale and thin, her forehead, one arm, and one shoulder in bandages. But when I stepped next to her, tears came to her eyes. "I've come for Teresa," I said, "but I'll care for your kids until you can come home." She reached her other hand out to mine, but said nothing. "We're grateful to you for keeping her," I said. "Do you have any message from my mother?" Beatrice answered slowly. "No." She just handed Teresa to me before they took her. She told them Teresa was mine. We only spoke with our eyes. I've been praying for her. "Gracias," I said again, my throat aching for Mama. "I have money for a coyote, but we can use it for food, and when I cross, I'll do it on my own." "That's good, very good," Beatrice said, "but Maria, you must not give up hope for your mother." I went back to the shack, where Mama still seemed so present. "Is there hope?" I said aloud to the walls. "Is there?" Our money went quickly, feeding 7, but Teresa and the other children gained strength. Still, I felt guilty using Dona Elena's money without heading directly home. I gave the vitamins only to Teresa, and one afternoon, as I pushed the pill into her mouth, I vowed to myself that I would help Beatrice's children, no matter what happened. I couldn't help any others. 2 days later, I was beginning to write Julia another letter when the pregnant woman who had brought milk the first night came to the door. "A letter's come to Beatrice," she said, "from a refugee center in Honduras." I took the letter, barely breathing. The returned address was just across the border from my country. "Mama," I said. "Maybe it's about Mama." But the letter was addressed to Beatrice. My hand trembled. I did not know if I should open it. "Beatrice doesn't have anybody there," the pregnant woman said. "I think you should read it." I tore the letter open. "To Beatrice Esqueda," the letter began. "I am Sister Joanne Thompson at the Chalatenango Refugee Center in Honduras, near the Salvadoran border. I send you greetings and am trying to reach Julia Cordova and Maria and Oscar Acosta with a message from their mother." I began to cry. "I'm writing to you and to an address in Chicago to tell them that their mother is alive and with us." The letter continued. "She reached us safely 5 days ago and is in fairly good health. Although she's gone through much, she's begging us to find out information about her 1.5-year-old daughter, Teresa. Please send us any information you have. Try to inform her other children about her safety. Thank you, and may God be with you." I swept up little Teresa, holding her out in front of me, her surprised face above mine. "Mama's alive! Mama's alive!" I shouted. "Safe! Alive! Like Oscar and you!" "She escaped again!" I swung the startled baby around in circles until my hair was flying in my face and Teresa laughed at me. Then, carrying Teresa with me, I went to tell Beatrice. Later that afternoon, when I'd calmed down, I sat with my back against the trunk in Beatrice's main room and finally drew a picture of Mama. I drew her soft, round face, the cheekbones standing out with age and sadness, the lines of her forehead reaching with gentleness to her hairline, and her long hair pulled back in a rubber band. And then, after sharpening my pencil, I drew hope in the center of her kind eyes. When I finished, I folded the drawing and held it against me. "Mama, you're alive. Someday we'll be together again," I promised. I also thought of Alicia. Maybe she was still alive too. Maybe someday we'd see her. That evening I wrote to Mama in Honduras, telling her I had Teresa and that we were heading north to join the others. I also wrote to Juliana Oscar, telling them all the good news and enclosing the picture of Mama. 2 days later another letter arrived, this one addressed to me. I opened it quickly. It was from Tomas. "My friend Maria," it began. "I am writing to send everyone's greetings and to tell you that we miss you. We're praying that you have arrived safely and are with Teresa. Ramona's smiling and Oscar's fine. We hung your drawing of the ocean in the living room, and when I see it, I see you. The Quetzal lady seems to be gone. I saw Lake Michigan, and it reminded me some of the ocean. When you return, I'll take you to see it. Be strong when you cross. I hope this letter reaches you. Your very good friend, Tomas." I smiled and felt warm, as if Tomas was watching me. That night, I slept, holding the letter. At last, Beatrice returned, and I stayed for 3 more days to take care of her and the children. The 3rd night I said to her, "We need to leave tomorrow. Otherwise I won't have fare back home. But I can give you a little." "Yes," Beatrice said. "It's time for you to go. God has provided. I'll send a shawl with you to carry Teresa as you cross the river. Maybe when my kids are older, I'll try too." Maybe there's hope for us in Chicago, Beatrice. On my way to the bus, when I left, I saw 2 people. They were putting up posters. They said many people were trying to change things with immigration, and they gave me addresses for when I get back. Beatrice smiled. "That's good. You've got to have hope." Early the next morning, I put a rag diaper on Teresa, bent over from my waist, and heaved her onto my back, the old-fashioned way. As I did it, her little arms encircled my neck like around Mama. I stood up, tying her tightly with the shawl, and tickled her on one of her bare feet. Carrying bottled water and tortillas, I set out walking toward the city center to catch a bus northward.